Welcome to the D&D Fitness Radio podcast, brought to you by your hosts, Don Saladino from New York City and Derek Hansen from Vancouver, Canada.
Awesome. So you guys got a minute to catch up. I apologize.
Yeah. No, it's cool hearing about his mechanical stuff. Yeah.
Well, that's what I want to do today, Matt. So, Derek, Matt and I have become good buddies over the last few months through Gunnar Peterson. Matt's a West Side Barbell guy. He's got a good online business going. Matt, kind of what we do here is we make this more about just a fun conversation. And then from I feel like we never push product. We never really dive in and sound hard salesy. We just like to interview really cool people. And the next thing you know, they're interested and they like go to your site. And I'm like, I always soft sell this stuff, and I feel like that goes a longer way. Matt, Derek has turned into one of my closest buddies. Ironically, he lives in Vancouver, and I only see him a couple of times a year, but we're probably on 150 episodes on this podcast. And to be honest with you, it's really raw. It's just Derek and I having a conversation. Derek came into New York City years ago when I had my club, and Derek trained under Charlie Francis, who, Charlie, we all know, trained Ben Johnson. And
I read all this shit.
Yeah, all this shit. So Derek's, in my eyes, one of the most well-known and one of the smartest running mechanics coaches on the planet. So like anytime I have people interested in running mechanics, I flood them to Derek. We do a lot of collaboration together. And that's what we've really found is we have like our unofficial family of people, like, realize you're my powerlifting guy, right? Like, and it's nice to have, because then someone really wants to dive into things. We're like, oh no, you need to talk to Matt Wenning, 2,800 plus total with gear on, and 2,400 without. And this guy is, what I love about Matt is he's not as linear with his training as most West Side guys I feel like they are. And he's doing lateral sled drags and sprinter step ups and all these things that we promote a lot of. But now Matt's putting his flair on training. Check him out. And we suddenly have created this really humble, nice group of coaches that just all want to see each other win. And that's why
it's a good idea.
Yeah, it's solid. So let's just dive into it. So first thing, like Derek and I always laugh, like there's never any fancy intros, never any bullshit. I mean, the first thing I'm really interested in this, before maybe Matt Wenning, like one of the strongest human beings that ever lived, but like I'm more interested in, like, as interested as I am in that, your obsession with cars is pretty freaking cool.
Yeah.
Where did this come from?
So my dad was a diesel mechanic, and so he was always tinkering on cars and semis. And so even I remember at 4 years old, my dad put me in a welding outfit and a helmet and having me welding equipment when I was like 4 years old. I had no idea what the hell I was doing. And I actually did pretty well at it. And he's like, well, son of a bitch, you do pretty well at that. So I started, when he was home on the weekends, I would go with him to the garage that he would keep his semis, because we had lifts and every kind of, pneumatical tool you could imagine. And we would just work on stuff. And I remember working on semis before working on cars. And so I always loved the smell of diesel. And I always loved the simplicity of diesel engines, as far as, they fire on compression, not on utilization of spark plugs. So they run on just compressing the gas and air. So it's very interesting on how they work, because I was always enamored by those engines when I was a kid, and the sound of that, it just had a completely different sound than a gasoline motor. And then as you grow up, diesels weren't fast when I was a kid. So at least it wasn't popular to have fast diesel. So, I dove into having a Grand National.
I remember the Grand Nationals.
Yeah, those were all like the super tinker cars, that the first ones you could actually tune. And so I had an 87 T-Type, which was a silver Grand National, and got it to run like 12 seconds with like $1,500. Wow. And that was kind of the start. And then I went into a little bit of a lowrider phase, because that was kind of the culture at the time. And I had a 79 Cadillac on hydraulics, and then got rid of that and got a 87 Suburban and did the lifted four-wheel drive thing. And
by the way, I got to cut you off. My first vehicle was a 92 Suburban. Obviously it was used. I got my first, maybe a 91. I can't remember, but I put a 3-inch suspension lift on it, and I put 33 by 12 5s, BFG mud terrains on it. I even remember my outlaw rims. And I just
Yeah.
remember, you know what I'm talking about. I mean, there was just, I mean, it's just, there's something so much fun about, you could park a Ferrari in my driveway and I'd be less interested. Like my dream car would be to rebuild like an International Scout or like that, you know, just older.
Yeah. So I was kind of in that middle because, you know, growing up as a kid, like the Lamborghini Countach was the ultimate car from the Cannonball runs and all that stuff. And, but, you know, I grew up in a small town, Indiana. Nobody had that shit. So it was all 4-wheel drives and Grand Nationals and shit like that. So the first car I really dug into hard is that Suburban. I put a 383 stroker motor in it. We did, you know, 35 6-inch lift, but I did like double shocks on it, steering stabilizers, and you know, it'd do 125 miles an hour, and it was a big 4-door Suburban, and we would just go out and mud the shit out of that thing. And so I ended up getting the shit out of it in a tree, and that's when I started to learn how to do body work, and that's actually what I'm doing today on my 92 Dodge. So my Cummins 12 valve that I'm building has 1,016 horsepower and almost 2,000 foot-pounds of torque on 40s. So
my God,
yeah, I've been building it for 6 years. We just got the frame powder coated. I'll send you some pictures later.
Oh, you got to send it, Derek. Are you much of a gearhead being in Vancouver, or are you just?
Well, I was saying to Matt that my father has his original 65 Mustang he bought, you know, in 65, and he's restored it a couple of times, and we did a final one and just had some disc brakes added. So we're just trying to get that up to speed. So basically my son can drive it, right? So it's a nice project to have.
The heirlooms are super cool because the truck that I have is somewhat of an heirloom. So long story short, the 92 Cummins 12 valve that I'm working on, my dad wanted so bad. He calls my mom at the dealership. I mean, he's signing the papers. My mom's like, look, we just had another kid. We can't afford this truck, you know, blah, blah, blah. So he ends up walking out and not getting it, super pissed off. And 4 months later, he finds out he's terminal with cancer and never gets the truck. So I spent probably about 6 years in 2012 looking for one. I found one in Utah that had no rust on it, and I brought it back to Ohio, stuffed it in my garage, and just kept saving my spare change until I could just take it completely apart and build it the way I wanted it, you know.
And oh God, so this is 2012. So you started working on this, and are you almost complete?
Yeah, it's close. So right now I'm working on the cab right now and sanding everything down and smoothing the firewall. So all of the old air conditioning pieces and everything that used to go into the firewall, we completely smoothed out because we're doing new technology like air conditioning and all that stuff. So you want to make it look like it came that way. So we cut the entire firewall out, welded it all back in, and then put only the inserts and excerpts of stuff that needs to be in it now. So when you open the hood, you'll look in and it'll look like it was built that way.
Awesome. So like I mean, this has always been like a deep passion of yours. I mean, you've obviously had two, right? I mean, powerlifting, I mean, I don't want to say, even though it was kind of like a job, that was also a passion, right? So, I mean, do you feel like that one was an escape from the other? Because a lot of times I feel like people that are great at things need to have that one little escape. And was that it? Was it like, all right, well, my job and my grid is about powerlifting and doing those totals, but my vehicles was a way for me to relax a little bit?
I think the initial part of it was what drew me to powerlifting was it was me against the weights. When I was a kid, probably mostly because of my dad passing away, I didn't have very good social skills, probably because I was dealing with that at the time. So what drove me into powerlifting and working on cars was that it was a singular process. And I didn't have to have good social skills to do that. And then once I decided I wanted to be a strength coach, I knew that had to change. So that's when I went to Ball State and started working with athletes and fine tuning and honing my coaching capacity. Because at that time I was already benching at 18 years old. I could do 225 for 45 reps, no big deal. And that got me on the news at the local Indianapolis station. And the head strength coach, John Torring from the Colts, saw that and offered me a job shadow. And he sits me down the first day and he's like, well, what do you want to do with this? I said, well, I want your job. And he laughed, you know, and he's like, well, it's going to take a lot more than just being a big, strong guy to take my job. And I'm like, well, what is it going to take? And long story short, he starts talking to me about having to go to school and getting a master's. And at first I got the wind out of my sails, because I'm like, I'm not a school guy. I didn't do well in high school due to my dad. And I started to turn it back around my senior and junior year, but it just wasn't enough to bring my GPA up to be college material. And so he's like, well, the school that is your local school, which was Ball State University, was the top school in the country for exercise science at the time. So the dice were perfect. And long story short, I go to apply to school and I get rejected due to my high school grades. And just so happened, the administrative director worked out at the YMCA where I trained. I didn't even know him. And he goes, "You're that big, strong kid that's over at the Y, aren't you?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he goes, starts asking me about creatine monohydrate, because this is 1998. And it was a new supplement. And I was like, well, it goes into the cell and it brings more water with the cell, and with that brings ATP. I started talking to him about, I've been reading this stuff. And he's like, "You're really into this." I'm like, "Well, yeah, that's kind of what I want to do for my profession." And just so happened, he sneaks me in under the radar on probation. And my first semester, I get like a 3.9 GPA. And that was when the career path started. But, I was told in high school I wasn't college material, all those different things. And then ended up not being true, graduating with a 3.85 in biomechanics under Dr. Kwan, which actually invented motion analysis. So there were a lot of different properties that just, the cards fell at the right time at the right place for me.
I mean, that's amazing. Was your, I mean, you said you wanted to get that guy's job, but was there this deep drive to be like a strength and conditioning coach for a pro team, or were there some other things that interest you as well?
At first, you're so tunnel vision because you're from a small town. All I saw was Indianapolis Colts or Indiana Pacers or Chicago Bears, So I didn't realize that the scope of things was so much broader. I didn't realize you could be a strength coach in other places. I mean, we didn't even have a strength coach at our high school. We had more state championships than I believe any high school in the country. Muncie Central Bearcats, that was the movie that Hoosiers was based on. And long story short, we, in the 90s, strength conditioning at the high school level was still kind of in its infancy. And even in the early 90s, there still weren't, every college didn't have a strength coach yet. So it wasn't until the invention of the internet that I started to realize that there were way more job opportunities than just being a pro. But I looked at it this way: if I can shoot to be a pro strength coach, well, shit, I can fall anywhere. So if my idea is to get a master's degree, and my idea is to be as strong as I can be, the strongest guy in the world, why wouldn't those two things match up to being a pro strength coach in my mind? So for me, it was try to shoot for the stars and then land where you land. I think that's where people screw up, is they see maybe 2 or 3 steps they might be able to accomplish. And I was always looking at 15, 20 steps ahead with a smart program and an idea how to get there, and that led me into multiple areas. I mean, I don't know of anybody that in the mid 2000s was doing tactical strength conditioning at the level that I was doing it at. And it just so happened to fall in my hands, being at the right place in the right time with the right degrees and the right experience. So again, I think, trying to be the highest level strength coach can lead you anywhere. If your goal is to be a high school strength coach, it doesn't always necessarily mean you'll make it pro. But if your goal is a pro strength coach, you might be at the biggest high school in the country. So for me, it was always about setting goals that were, for most people, unattainable. I was willing to move anywhere to do it. I was willing to step out of my comfort zone and go to college, which I was told my whole life I wasn't good enough for. So yeah, I mean, that's just kind of how it all started and evolved.
So now, did you go get your master's degree before you went to Westside?
No. So in '99, I go over to the Arnold Classic, and George Halbert had just hit a 766 bench press at 242 body weight. This is an equipment, but still I watched George do a 625 bench at 230 body weight raw. So this guy was just a freak. And I saw him hit this number, and I've been reading Louis' articles, and he's talking about getting faster to get stronger, and he's using bands and not bands yet, chains and things of that nature. And I'm like, man, this guy's way ahead of what I know. I need to get a hold of this dude. So just so happened, I'm walking into the Arnold Classic. I'm watching the bench press contest. I go back out into the, I don't know what you call it, like the area where it's not the expo. And Louis walking out with Dave Tate and Kenny Patterson and all these heavy hitters, Rob Fuzner and all these guys that were West Side legends. And I was too nervous to go up and talk to him. And my buddy just cracked me right in the ribs and his elbow. He's like, get your fucking ass over there and talk to this guy. You're benching 500 pounds as a teenager. You know, you need to know what he knows. And so I get the guts and go up and talk to him. And you got to remember, I'm not just talking to Louis. I'm surrounded by the old time legends.
Yeah, I mean, these are
Yeah,
legends.
you're surrounded by the entourage of dudes that were not only insanely strong, most of them at that time were, you know, immense drug dealers, hardcore to the bone type, original West Side Columbus hard asses that, you know, got into powerlifting from fighting and from just impressing Louis from just being a badass on the streets. And so it's kind of like walking into a Hell's Angels bar and trying to prove yourself at 18 years old. You better be a tough dude.
Well, what'd you say? Were you just like, hey, Louis, I'm 18 and I bench 500 pounds? Because I heard that's almost good enough. Like he wanted to train world champion. So if he saw you were 18 putting up that type of weight, he's going to be curious.
Well, so at first he didn't believe me, and then he went and looked me up. And I didn't know this until about a month later, because I had to get the balls to go over there and train. So I go, hey, my name's Matt Wenning. I just won the world championships as a teenager, just benched 500, squatted like a little under like 685. And he's like, yeah, you're pretty strong. Why don't you come by the gym sometime? So I ended up reaching out to him about 3 months later. He actually had looked me up to see if I was bullshitting. And I was a big kid. I graduated high school at 250. And so he looked me up and he saw that I actually had won. So when he invited me over to the gym, he put me with I wouldn't say the strongest crew of guys in the bench pressers, but the guys that were all well over 500. And I ended up beating like 3 out of the 5 guys in a couple of accessory exercises. One being a on the floor tricep extension. We're using 90-pound dumbbells paused on the floor for tricep extensions. And everybody else gets like 10 or 11 and I get 16. And when I did that, Louis looked at the weakest guy in the group and kicked him out of the gym permanently. He goes, you just let a teenager come in here and kick your fucking ass. You're not West Side material. Get out of the gym. And I had to take his place. And that's when I realized I was in a completely different scenario. This was not a gym. This was 100% balls to the wall, hardcore. And so that really woke my attention, even though I was very driven in weights at the time, to realizing that I was in an area that would be snapped apart from you in a heartbeat if you weren't willing to bring 100%. So that's what my first inclination was of going into the next level of powerlifting, which was going into collegiate level ranks. And at that time, within 1 year of being in the collegiate ranks, I had every American record and was ranked in the pro level as a college student, you know, and getting straight A's. So Louis really latched on to me at the time because he not only knew that I was physically capable and mentally tough enough to withstand that type of coaching, but I was also insanely smart and well-read. So he knew I was a huge advantage to his program because stuff that he might have trouble reading or writing, I could come in and help because of the schooling that I had. Plus, it gave him more credibility with the academic community because now, as I graduate, he has a person lifting there with a master's degree in biomechanics from the top professors in the world. So for him, it was a you know, a multiple birds with one stone type ideal.
I mean, unreal.
That's very interesting. Yeah, like just before I forget, I remember Al Vermeil saying how he was brought up. His father was a mechanic and race cars too. So there's definitely some compatibilities here with the two professions. Yeah, that's amazing. And at some point, are you like, okay, I'm going to continue competing, or was it easy enough to do both, compete, but also develop yourself professionally as an educator and an influencer?
And that was the toughest part with all of it, because as an introvert, also pulled out of that from being a decent coach. You know, I feel like I had some of the hardest things in my corner to work with, trying to be a world champion in powerlifting when I really was a little tall. Like, like Don Saladino will tell you, being 6'1" is not ideal for being a world champion powerlifter. So a lot of the guys I would be at the world championships, and guys were 5'9", 5'10", 305. I'm 6'1", 305, 307, and I'm beating these guys in squat and bench because my technical efficiency is so good, and I'm willing to take the long road to get better. So I found that, yes, balancing being a world-class competitor and also building a massive business was very difficult, to the point that in my mid-late 30s, I had to choose and went the business route just because my body was still holding together. I don't have any injuries, but I knew, when you're sleeping 13 hours a day, you're taking minimal work in order to recover from your training, and you do that for 15 years straight in your 20s and 30s, you're at max. I mean, I would train my ass off for an entire year for my bench to go from 606 to 615. And that's when the big gains are gone and you're fighting for pounds or ounces. And, at that particular time, you can only run your car at 250 miles an hour before it blows up. And so I opted at 37 to say the competitive nature of powerlifting was done for me, and I have learned what all it was going to bring. And that's what I felt was a very limiting factor for a lot of coaches, and I felt wasn't a limiting factor in the Soviet Union. So if you read a lot of Verkhoshansky, and you read a lot of Medvedev,
Yes.
and you read a lot of Vorbiev, those guys were all medalists in the Olympics and then became coaches and then got their PhDs. And that's what I wanted to be, because what I felt like in America is we have all of these experts that have never really put their own ass on the line. And then they only know what they read, which still doesn't mean that I'm sure Al Vermeil was not a 1,000-pound squatter, and I'm okay with that. And I'm not saying that he's in some ways probably not better than me. But my point being is it always gives you an advantage to know what the athlete is going through. And if you've done something at the most intensive and highest peak level, you just have a different ideal of not only what an athlete is capable of, but also coaching cues and mental processes of thought to be able to get an athlete to go above and beyond what they think is capable, because you've broken all of your mental and physical barriers.
All right, so this becomes more and more interesting. I mean, Matt, I thought I knew a lot about you here, but like I think it's wild how you go in, obviously master's degree, West Side, which most people listening to this, I don't think are really going to understand what this place was really about. I mean, this was when you say dungeon, when you say hellhole, I'm not saying that as an insult to Louis. I actually went to see Louis Simmons speak at a high school. I drove to Philadelphia, I want to say probably back in 2006, 2007 to listen to him talk. I was in a car 3 hours to sit in some cafeteria and listen to him speak for 3 hours, because I even recognized then that there was a lot of brilliance to things that he spoke about. But in a way, I've run the conjugate method years ago, and I've run your program a little bit more recently, and I'm having a great time with it. I'm really enjoying it. My body feels great. There were things though that you tweaked a bit differently, right? Like you did not turn around and say, I am taking Louis' program and I'm just putting it under my sleeve and I'm running it with it. I do like the variability. I actually like how you wave the volume almost pretty much every week or every few weeks. I'm noticing what you're doing with deloading the spine on certain weeks, how you might be someone from there's a lot that you're putting.
There's this fork in the road between me and Louis, and my system is devoted and developed more Soviet, and Louis' system is developed a little bit more Bulgarian. And the Bulgarian system was that we're going to find the best athlete and we're going to give him the most cutthroat program. And I'm not saying that Louis didn't train smart, don't get me wrong. But what I'm saying is that Louis had no problem injuring you to figure out what your limits were, where the Soviets realized that injury and damaging hundreds of people to find only one or two was not conducive for statistical data, and was also not conducive for creating a world level team, because they wanted to be able to study hundreds of master of athletes to be able to understand how training actually worked. Whereas the Bulgarian system works, but it works for the Bo Jacksons. And so Louis was very heaven set on trying to make sure that he could try to find the Bo Jackson as a system, whereas the Russians wanted more people versus, more research versus more understanding of the human body and how it actually evolves. So the Soviet and Bulgarian system were very similar until about 1973, and then they split apart. And what you found was Louis would use competition in the gym, and he would start getting away from percentages and recovery to push the mindset of Westside Barbell. Whereas I started looking at the Soviets training so much smarter pre-1973, 76, and plus, especially including the Eastern Germans, that my system started to develop more on recovery. So as I started reading more and more books that either Louis didn't see or just didn't dig through enough, you start realizing that at the elite level, recovery becomes the most important tool, not the training. Whereas in the beginning and intermediate stages, training is the most important tool. And then you just run that into the ground until an injury or old age or, burnout occurs. The Soviets were able to withstand athletes in much longer quadrennials or Olympic cycles. So, a Russian team member would get up to an Olympic cycle level of training, and they would hold that for anywhere from 2 to 3 Olympics, versus the Bulgarians would get a guy in the Olympics and then he was trash. So economic wise, the Soviets program was much more thought out and much more individualized. Whereas the West Side system is kind of cutthroat. You fit the system, whereas the Russians make the system fit the athlete. So I started reading a lot more on Bondarchuk and Medvedev and started seeing these 3 and 4 week ways with deloads automatically built in. And this is where Louis and I would have huge arguments on how much downtime an athlete would need in the month in order to absorb the training. So the problem is, it's kind of like eating food. You can eat all of the calories you want, but it's not what you eat, it's what you absorb. And it's what you advantageously use. You can have 500 grams of protein in your body, but if your body can only utilize 165, it doesn't matter. And so that's when you start realizing that there's just so much more. I started with my higher level understanding of training. I started understanding that there was so much more involved than just the gym, recovery, nutrition, even meditation in some ways, flexibility, mobility. You never saw guys stretching at Westside Barbell. You never saw winning warm-ups at Westside Barbell. We would warm up at the plastic lift, smash it to pieces, and then do 3 to 4 accessory exercises afterwards. I started realizing that Medvedev with the Dynamo Club was utilizing a 15-minute warm-up that was dedicated towards weak link parameters. And then I started realizing through some other Russian tech that the minimal amount of percentages or RPE that you need to get better was 4. So I start plugging all of these different pieces together and start realizing that they're telling me to do winning warm-ups in these different manuals if I'm just smart enough to plug it all together. So
not to cut you off, but the winning warm-up for me, for most people who don't really understand, and I'm going to give you an example. An upper body day, he might be focusing on areas like triceps. He might be focusing on the posterior chain, like say, a lat pull down. And, you might even be focusing on some form of an unstable press or loading the press maybe a little bit differently, like a reverse grip bench press, or doing something a little bit out of, someone's comfort zone. It's not traditional, but the repetition is very high. Matt typically likes to program it around 20 to 25 reps. He'll fluctuate anywhere from 3 to 4 rounds. I hope I'm being a good salesperson for you right now, but 3 to 4 rounds. And what it contradicts a bit of what a lot of us are taught when we're even getting into powerlifting. Like, oh no, you're going to eat into your energy, and you're not going to be able to hit a max effort lift. And Derek, not to jump, but this is why I want to connect these two. Derek taught me this with a lot of my lower body training. He was getting me into tempo runs, and he was having me doing things that were short, quick, brisk, not 100% max, maybe getting in 70% where I'm getting my feet to just be very springy off the belt, 15-second turnovers, 45-second walks. The next thing you know, 4 minutes, you're done. And what I was finding was 9 out of 10 times, I was maybe closer to 10 out of 10 times, I was going down into my lift and I was either hitting a PR or I was just feeling more fresh and better. So when you were introducing that to me, I was like, oh, this makes sense. And then I did it. And then I felt like, holy shit.
You start reading a bunch of shit on post-activation potentiation. It makes all the sense in the world. You have to prime the central nervous system to function the different tissues, especially in multi-joint movements, in a orchestrated fashion. So if I have a quadricep to hamstring imbalance and I do 100 hamstring curls before I squat, my hamstrings are going to be more potentiated into that compound movement to activate, therefore giving me more chance to not only have better technique and more safety, but also higher numbers. And that's where people just don't realize. And what it really comes down to, and the reason most coaches or used to frown away from that type of shit, was the fact that their GPP or conditioning wasn't high enough.
They weren't in shape.
If you're in good shape, what does 4 RPE doing 4 sets to 25 on 3 exercises have any bearing on maxing? It doesn't.
It feels good. It actually feels good. You're going to lift and you feel like, to be honest with you, you feel like your joints feel better. You feel like your tendons and ligaments get a bit stronger. You're actually getting, from a hypertrophy standpoint, like you will see an improvement. And if your goal is to get a little bit leaner, like this isn't going to work against you. Like I don't see the downside of it. But again, people get their ass in the air about science and they want to make these arguments. And I'm like, I don't know, you know?
Yeah, the big hypertrophy thing that most people need to be worried about in all reality is ligament, tendon, and soft tissue hypertrophy and adaptation to training. Because if you hurt a joint, you can't train no matter how strong your muscles are. Right. So if you get your ligaments, tendons, and soft tissue adapted to high volume training, they can withstand all kinds of maxes because they have the volume capacity. And that's where people don't really realize. They think muscle, strength, but there's all these different key components in between that allow that to happen for a long enough period of time that you can actually see high levels of hypertrophy or high levels of strength or high levels of fat loss. Because if those key connectile tissues cannot hold on or sustain the workouts that you're providing, none of it matters.
Dave?
I'm curious, Matt, what information did you pull from Bodnerchuk? I was teaching some courses in Kamloops last weekend, and I know they had a 21-year-old who just won the world championships in the hammer throw. And they all, Bodnerchuk is kind of the source there. He's moved there like 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
They've just had success. So I'm curious, what have you pulled from him?
Well, without having the books right in front of me to go, yeah, here, this reference, I can tell you exactly one thing that I can remember right off the top of my head. Bondarchuk with throwers had 100 strength exercises that he would rotate. So he didn't specify the strength in one particular range. He made the athlete strong in all angles and all muscle groups. So he was kind of the branch kind of divider or the preacher to bring conjugate to throwing in the Soviet system. And with that being said, he was the one that orchestrated so many more exercises involved so that the body would not succumb to the law of accommodation. So what happens is that people find, and Don will tell you the same thing, and if you work with runners, will tell you the same thing. They get to, let's just use this as an example. They get to a 200-pound bench press, and everything that they've done to get to a 200-pound bench press, they think they have to need to increase that in order to go to 300. When in reality, they're different ponds that require different capacities that also require different individual needs. So if you have a broad library of training, you can divide and utilize the training in order for the athlete to get the adaptations possible for them to succeed by utilizing a vast array of movements, which also doesn't limit their growth and reduces their mileage.
So where do you feel like understanding the Bulgarian approach and the Soviet approach in a nutshell, because a lot of people aren't going to understand what that is. Where do you feel like your training has differed besides the Wenning warm up? What do you feel like is the most noticeable between you and the traditional conjugate method?
Well, a lot of it's just the individual process, understanding when you need to deload, taking resting heart rates. They were doing that too. A lot of the stuff, it's funny because I found that my training, even though I didn't copycat a lot of the Soviet stuff, I reinforced it by reading the Soviet books. So when I dove in the last 2 years to write my book for Human Kinetics, that'll be out hopefully next year, it just reinforced everything I already knew with references from books that were from the 50s all the way up until the 90s. And what I started to realize was that everybody's training journey is going to be a little different, and how they respond to different loading is going to be different. And a lot of times coaches only understand their way. They don't understand how the adaptation changes. And that, I think, was one of Louis' biggest faults, was the fact that he felt that the gym was so superior. And for powerlifting, it really was. I mean, if you go back and look at how powerlifters were training pre-Louis Simmons, other than Fred Hatfield, you're going to start to see that, individuality really wasn't there. So it's one of those things that I think understanding your individual weaknesses, knowing anterior to posterior imbalances, those are things that Louis, I think, had a limiting knowledge on how to fix. He might be able to say, well, you're not keeping your chest up on the squat, or you're not pushing out on that. But to go to the actual muscle groups that need to be more dialed in might have been a limiting factor and an advantage to me because of my biomechanics background.
You see that in a lot of sports, though. Like you'll see that in college football, where you have the program that just has all the talent and they beat the hell out of them and they still get results. And then you'll see maybe a smaller program who does what you do. They individualize more, or the athlete that doesn't succeed in this environment, but they go to another team, right? So that's exactly what you're doing.
Well, I think what you need to keep in mind with those statistics, and you're absolutely right, is look at how many football players in the NFL are from small schools versus large schools. I want to believe it's 60% of the NFL is comprised of not Alabama, not Ohio State, not Georgia, because by the time they get to the pros, they're fried. They're injured, they're beat up, they're overtrained. And the ones that come from the small schools have more individual mindsets in their programming and didn't attain the mileage in the playing. And that's why they're succeeding in their true prime, which is in their pro years.
That's true. There was a number like 25-30% are Div 2 players in the NFL, right? So exactly. Yeah, you're right.
So that kind of sticks our point to the T.
Derek, so I didn't know if you saw the other day, or Matt, Arnold was getting interviewed. Oh God, it was on social media. I'm drawing a blank right now, but he was getting interviewed about aging. He was getting interviewed about, where his physique was going. And I got to be honest, it was a bit depressing to hear him speak that way. I mean, here's a guy that had some sort of an influence. You got to admit it on all of us, Matt. Like whether you're a powerlifter or a bodybuilder, Arnold somehow influenced every single one of us.
Yeah.
And I think my whole thing is that he was saying, when I was in my 30s, I never thought about being older, and now I look at myself in the mirror and I don't necessarily, do I like what I see? Do I look better than most people? Sure, but like I'm not. Part of me obviously part of all of us understand that age is going to be a factor. It always is, right? We have to do things differently and we have to adapt and adjust. But I also believe that as we get older, a lot of times people lose that motivation. Like this Arnold is hungry now, as he was when he was 30, to maintain his physique, or, and this is no offense to Arnold, is he, living his life differently? Training is still a huge part of it, but is he prioritizing things differently? And I know the nutrition better than anyone when it comes to aesthetic change. And it's like, okay, is he weighing his food maybe like he used to, or maybe he never did? Obviously, I know he wasn't a big food weigher. Still, there's, in my opinion, do you really believe he's taking things as seriously as he was when he was 30? And because now I'm seeing people that are in their 70s and 80s and they're motivated and they look pretty damn good. And you know what? You could feel pretty damn good, but you need to adjust your training and you need to.
I think a lot of people, I mean, I'll put myself in that same boat. I'm in that transitional period, as you well know. And it's one of those things that you cannot hold on. If you have pushed your limits in your genetic prowess at your peak age, it's nearly impossible to look like Arnold could not look like he looked at 28 years old now.
No way, exactly, and I really agree with that.
your frame of reference has to change. But what I think the most important factor to all of it, and as you well know, Don, is the problem with aging is that you have to do things smarter. And most people that are genetically gifted didn't do it smart in the first place. So they don't keep learning as they keep getting better. I mean, you've been helping me with my diet and my blood work, and I have to keep getting smarter and smarter and smarter to sustain what I had even 6 years ago. And so most people, because it becomes so much work and so much diligence, they just give up because it came so easy to them. So sometimes when you're in your prime, when you're like an Arnold, and I'm not saying his gains came easy, but I'll bet you they came easier than the average person. And I will guarantee you that because they came easy, the work ethic is just so much different now because he can't go in and do biceps once a week and they just go and look like crazy because the age factor.
But that's exactly, you were alluding to my point here. It's like, is Arnold going to be able to look at the three of us right now and say, no, I'm doing everything in my power to optimize where I need to be? I know the answer is no. There's no way it is. But that's okay. Right? Like, Derek, that's okay. Like, I'm not saying.
Yeah, there's an example. Like somebody came to me and said, hey, you should go and run Masters track, run the 100 meters because and I'm like, listen, I did that since I was like 10 years old. Like I ran track for, 30 years or whatever. And I'm done. Like I'm tapped out. So I'm sure there's a lot of cases.
400? What was your fastest 400 ever?
Oh, I don't know, like 49 seconds or something like that. But yeah, like I just don't have that desire to train like that, or so I think
I think there's merit in that, because like what I'm telling you, like is when you give everything you have. Like people ask me now, Matt, do you feel like you want to squat 1200 again, or do you want to bench? I don't even thinking about those numbers gives me such anxiety, because I can be honest with you right now, I don't know how I had the balls to even do that. I mean, I'm a different person now. And what you start realizing is that I did everything smart. I didn't gain a lot of mileage on anything like that. But it's one of those things when you lay everything you have on the table at something, you have nothing left to prove. But here's the problem. Most people, even in their prime, never gave it their all. So now they have all of this animosity built up that, what if I can do this now or this or that? I mean, I still love working out and staying in shape. I still love squatting heavy from time to time. But to do world-class shit, if you've been one of the best in the world, it's one of those things where you've been there, done that, and you want to see other people achieve their goals and push their limits so that they can be happy when it's just not attainable anymore. I think having Arnold's thought process of having him look like he looked in 1976 is stupid, but he can look better than everyone else his age if he's willing to put the time, energy, and the smarts to it. So.
Right. I just, I'm a little stubborn. I mean, I'm 46 now, and what I loved about this industry is I really felt like most of the time, not always, what you put into it is what you're going to get out of it. Like if you educate yourself more on training and you understand the importance of rest and nutrition and digestion and sleep, like good things are going to start happening. I'm not saying you're going to be Matt Wenning in powerlifting, and I'm sure as hell not saying you're going to be Arnold Schwarzenegger on the Olympia stage in 1975, right, when he was in South Africa. But I'm saying that you could do some pretty great things, and you can put yourself in a direction to be successful in life. I'm not saying the sport. I'm saying that when you're in shape, if you're healthy, this is a big driving force, in my opinion, to people being able to walk around with their chest up and lead by example for their children and lead by example in the workplace. It's like being healthy and is going to, I think, more times than none lead you to a successful, happier life.
Yeah, I mean, everything that is quality in life requires resistance, whether it's mental or physical. And that's the problem, is most people shy away from resistance. They don't want it, because most of the time, most people that push resistance, especially in our field, people that only talk about intensity, they probably don't know what they think they know. And so that's where I have a very hard time of people telling me, hey, you need to max out all the time. You need to give it 100%. No, you don't. The Russians never went over 90% in the gym until it was time to compete. And that's the problem, is you don't have to be at that level and compete. You don't have to push 100% to get gains out of anything. You just need to be consistent, and consistency will always trump intensity. I'll take a guy that will work out 3/4 as hard as he can for 10 years straight versus the dude that'll work out for 2 years as hard as he can, and now he's all banged up.
But Derek, you know what the problem is? If you think about it, is we start relating success to a level of intensity. And I've been victim to it. I remember, having to lay at Steel Gym, and I'm not a big guy like Matt, but like I once squatted 315 for 30. That was a lot of reps for me. And I almost had a brain aneurysm. I had to lay down for 2 hours before they had to wheel me out. And looking back on it now, I'm very happy I did those things because it showed me a level, and Matt knows, intensity and getting under the bar. It's fucking real. Like, it's a real thing. When Matt's getting under the bar, 1,200 pounds, no one, myself, you can't even imagine what that must be like, the amount of compression on the spine and how strong, the ungodly level of strength that you have to have. But I also do understand that people will relate intensity with Ronnie Coleman. Well, he was the greatest Olympia competitor ever. And, well, wait a second. How do we know what he would have done if he took maybe a little bit more of a scientific approach, and maybe if he had a team standing over him saying, nope, let's deload here.
I think, not cutting you off. Yeah, not to cut you off, but I think in that generation, the guy who won was Jay Cutler, because look how good a shape he's in now. And he has no health issues that I know of. He gets around. If he still wants to train hard, he can. So
look at how Jay trained. Look at how Jay trained. Look at how Jay trained.
Smart.
He trained smart, and you never saw Jay going, you never saw Jay getting under the weight that Ronnie got under. He was strong, but you never saw him put himself into a situation where you were like you watch Ron train and people would be like it was like you were used to it. Cause I think that's,
it was powerlifting. It was elite powerlifting level, crazy shit and bodybuilding that nobody had ever seen.
Yeah.
And I think the problem is that what we need to do is hold people on higher pedestals that achieve the goals that they want to achieve, but they don't pay for the mileage. Yeah. That to me is the winners, because all of this, in reality, we can step all back, and we do this for health now. We want to get people healthy and strong, but for most people, they treat this as a secondary hobby. So how do you get people better at everything without creating the mileage? You got to do it smart.
Oh, so true. Dave?
It's very tough. It's very tough now, especially in the social media age, where people want to see crazy shit, right? So they're not going to watch somebody who's has a balanced program and accumulates volume at different grades of intensity. They want to see the guy doing the crazy stuff. So it'll be interesting to see where things go.
I think that'll backfire. I think it'll backfire eventually, because you can only go crazier and crazier and crazier until it's just retarded.
Yeah.
But I'm not talking about it, but we're talking about it now, which I think is the first step, Matt, not to interrupt, but we are talking about it now. Where in the past, it was such a shock factor. People are just unloading stuff on social media. It's the Wild West, and all the people who have put all this time in their education is pissed off at this guy because he never stepped foot on the floor, but he knows how to market, where they all need a little bit of what each other do to, and everyone's going to be more successful. But now it's being spoken about more. And I think, Matt, I agree with you.
Yeah, I think we took a 20-year step back. Don, you've been in the field quite a little bit longer than me, but I think that we were ahead scientifically on training smarter in 99 to 2003. And I think we took a big step backwards in the last 20 years, not in everything, but in most things. And I think now we're starting to see that transition again. But it's one of those things where it's sad to see, because if the average person wants to be great at something, they're going to have to do it smart because they don't have the genetics. And I felt like I was one of those guys. I mean, yeah, I was a world-class lifter as a teenager, but I started lifting at 11 years old. So by the time I broke the world championships at 19, I hadn't missed probably more than a week of working out for 8 years before I got to where I was world-class, which would follow along the same lines in a track. Like if you were a track coach, right? If you had a guy for 8 years and did everything you said and had a little bit of genetics, he's going to be pretty good in 8 years. So I try to tell people, I know people default that 10-year, 10,000 hour rule, but I truly believe it's very real, especially if you want to be good and not get hurt from being good. That 10-year rule keeps you kind of grounded, smart, and making good decisions, that you don't do anything too fast or, too crazy, too quickly.
Yeah, there's something to be said for being patient and meticulous, right? And we have to reinfuse that with the education now.
Absolutely.
So Matt, listen, Matt, we're on an hour already. I can't even believe it. I feel like, I mean, Matt, it's funny. Matt and I started talking a lot before the Gunnar Peterson event in Nashville, and we've become good friends. And I'm hopefully going to get him out here in a month or so. Matt, it's also really impressive, and I want to close out on this. I mean, your business is going in a great direction. You're really mainstreaming a lot of your knowledge, and you're taking a lot of that powerlifting niche, but you're combining it with movement. You're combining with smarter training. You're combining with a smarter approach, and that's why I love what you're doing. If people want to hear more about your programs, social media handles, website, tell them where they can find you. I know you've been very generous with your time and answering some DMs here and there for people who are reaching out to you. Let them know.
So if you go to winningstrength.com, that's where you'll find the website. If you go on to the Winning Strength YouTube channel, we have, I think, 500 videos now that you can sift through and learn a ton from, all of how to set up bands, some of the stuff I say on recovery, some of the things I say about avoiding energy drinks and stuff of that nature, and supplementation, and where you probably should go for supplementation, just because, you know, it's the Wild West in the American facilities as far as GNC and vitamin shop. That none of that's FDA regulated. So we cover a lot of that. And then also I have a Patreon channel where I take DMs and help people answer their questions, look at their programs, do assessments of that nature. We do online coaching on the website. We have like 100 plus online clients, and everybody that's on the online coaching apps have a master's degree and at least 25 years experience in the field. So one of the guys is a head strength coach for one of the top universities in the country, which I don't want to say out loud because it probably get him in trouble. And then the other one played for the Dolphins and the Bengals and has master CSCC when the CSCS was brand new. So he's been around since the early 80s, kind of like a Gunnar Peterson. So those are the kind of guys we have on online coaching, which in my opinion, if you want customized stuff, is second to none. So those are the types of things that we do. And we also have Train Heroic, which is very affordable. If you don't have enough time and you need more detailed information on how to do the exercises, the Train Heroic app, you can click on it and there's a video next to every exercise to make sure that you're doing it correctly, and it calculates volume, intensities, and everything.
And Instagram handle?
Winning Strong. So that just changed.
Winning Strong. All right, cool. So I know Matt, Derek, Matt's gonna hopefully, Matt, we're saying it, and we hope by the new year you're gonna be able to be out here for a few days. What we're gonna do, what I want to do is we're gonna do a little shoot with Muscle and Fitness. We're gonna go live. We're gonna do some video content on Matt's world. We're gonna do some video content on my world. We're gonna have Rob cut and edit it. We'll probably go to the grocery store and kind of have some conversations with food, throw the weighted vest on, walk, have Rob film. We're just gonna get a couple of days where him and I dork out a little bit, and then have some fun and just get some fun training in and get some good food and just kick back a little bit. So hopefully
I'm ready.
But Derek, you're always welcome to come in. I know I'm going to see you. Actually, Derek's going to be in town November. You're staying with me. What night is that?
It's like 18th, 19th weekend.
Yeah, I mean, we gotta, maybe Matt's around. We can figure it out. But the more,
my November is wide open. We're just shooting pictures for the book early November, like the 3rd, and then my whole November is open.
All right, we're gonna figure it out. You and I will talk. Derek.